to the Language Fuel podcast. Our mission is to fuel the teaching and learning of languages worldwide. I'm your host, Joanna Smith. Hello and welcome to the Language Fuel podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today and listening. If this is your first time, welcome. And if you are a regular listener, welcome back. Now today I was thinking about what topic to do, and I was just reading through some of the Facebook groups that I'm a part of, and there's a little bit of a theme coming through, and something that I see very often. And here are two examples of what I'm seeing. The first one is someone saying, "Help, my learners are not interested at all in the lesson I've prepared. What can I do to motivate them?" And another common statement is something like, "Help, my teenage students are too energetic and they're not listening to me. How do I control them?" Now, while these situations might seem like opposite ends of the spectrum, it might be seen that that spectrum is classroom management, and that's what a lot of people talk about. How do I manage my class? How do I control the class, whatever. I actually think they're symptoms of the same problem, of the one issue, which is that students are not engaged with the teacher, either because they're just not paying attention, so they're turning off and being kind of boring, doing something else, or they're too energetic doing something else, but either way they're not engaging with the teacher. So it's an issue of student engagement. And because this is such a common issue, I've actually decided to do a podcast series. We're going to do a little mini series on this topic, 3 different podcasts, and this is the first one today. I'm going to call it classroom management because that's what most people think it is, and so it'll be easily found if you're looking for it. You could also call it student engagement, as I said before, but actually how I'm going to frame it is that this is a leadership issue. So if you think about student engagement or the lack of it, the first question you need to ask yourself is, why should a student engage with you? Another way to look at that is, why should a student follow you? If you have students following you, you're a leader. If students are not following you, you're not doing such a good job at leading them. So I would like to frame this as a leadership issue, and we're going to have this mini series on leadership in the classroom, but as I said, it's probably going to be called classroom management because that's what most people will recognize it as. One of my all-time favorite books on leadership is a book by John C. Maxwell, and it's called The 5 Levels of Leadership. It was written in 2011, so a few years back now, but I highly recommend it if you're interested at all in leadership, and I'll definitely put the link in the show notes below. So, while he has an excellent book on it, I'm not going to attempt to reproduce his book here whatsoever, but I am choosing to use his 5 levels as a framework from which to look at this issue of classroom leadership or classroom management. And it should help us diagnose why students may not be following the teacher. Why are they not engaged in the teacher? And in fact, John Maxwell himself actually does mention the fact that classroom teachers are leaders as well. So, he recognizes that role as a leadership role. It's definitely worth a read. I've got the ebook, so, I've listened to it while I've been doing the gardening or whatever. Very helpful information. Anyway, the 5 levels that he talks about are, number 1, position, 2, permission, 3, production, 4, people development, and 5, pinnacle. In this first podcast today, I'm going to talk about levels 1 and 2, which is position and permission. In the second podcast, that'll be where most of the meat probably ends up, I'm going to talk about level 3, production. And in the third and final podcast in this mini series, I'm going to talk about levels 4 and 5, people development and pinnacle. Right, so let's get straight into it. First, let's talk about the first level of leadership, which is position. Now, John C. Maxwell's blog describes it like this. He says this is the lowest level of leadership. It's the entry level, if you will. It's the only level that requires no ability or effort to achieve. So what he's saying is you can just be appointed to a position. Anyone can give you a position, call you a teacher, put you in a classroom, and there you are. It's actually very easy to do. And there's nothing wrong with having a leadership position, but there is everything wrong with relying only on the position to get people to follow you. And that's because it only works if you have leverage over your followers. And he talks about that being, say, job security or a paycheck. In a school environment, of course, there's exams to think about and so on, people getting good grades. So if there is some kind of leverage going on, people will follow because they feel like they have to. And I guess my thinking there is, what a horrible reason, a horrible motivation for students to follow the teacher just because there's some kind of leverage there. So it is really the lowest level there. To imagine this, it's, a person taking a position as a teacher, walking into the classroom, and there it is. That's all that it is. Now, obviously, in many instances, such as, reputable high schools in a lot of countries and so on, a person's only going to get that position after having done a lot of training, and presumably the training will show whether that person is effective as a teacher. So, certainly here in New Zealand, you can't get a job in a primary school or secondary school without having a degree in teaching, or a subject degree and then a diploma in teaching. So, we could probably assume that in many places, the teachers definitely do know what they're doing, and, I'm sure they have great skills. But I'm also very conscious that there are a lot of situations where someone could get a teaching position even if they don't have formal qualifications. I'm conscious that many young people from English-speaking countries like to take time off after college or university and travel a bit. And there are many English teaching jobs available for people who speak English, even if those people don't necessarily have formal training. Now, I'm using the word formal training here because, of course, we can learn about teaching in a number of ways, and it's, people can be fantastic teachers without formal training. I'm very much acknowledging that too. But I guess the point is that level 1 leadership is purely position. That's the very start of a leadership journey. You've been given the position, but there's really not much there. You need to move on through the levels because you're not going to get very far at level 1. The next level is permission. The students need to give you, the teacher, permission to lead them. You actually have to earn their permission. You have to earn the right and build their trust. So how is this done? How do we gain the permission of our students to lead them? It's done through relationships. It's not done by having a fancy degree stuck up on a wall, although hopefully if you do have a degree, you've learned a lot about how to build relationships. But the point is, it's not about the piece of paper. It's not about having the longest, most detailed lesson plan on your laptop case or something like that. John Maxwell puts it like this. He says, when you like people and treat them as individuals who have value, you begin to develop positive influence with them. Trust grows, which usually leads to respect. When there is mutual, my words here, when there is mutual respect between teachers and students, they will follow you. So you need to develop that respect, and you do that through relationships. Now, some of you might think, oh my goodness, I don't have time to build relationships. There's 30 students in class number 1, and I've got class number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 as well. And every day I see all of these students. How on earth am I supposed to do that? And shouldn't students follow the teacher whether or not they like the teacher? Well, I'd like to suggest here that the idea of relationship being important is not just John C. Maxwell's idea either. I'm just using his framework of the 5 leadership levels, but there's actually a mountain of research on the value of positive teacher-student relationships. Now, I'm going to put a link to just one of them, which highlights it. And that particular article that I will link to in the show notes has a great literature review, so you can, find other articles from there if you're interested in some of this research. The title of the article I will link to is called The Pro-Social Classroom, Teacher Social and Emotional Competence in Relation to Student and Classroom Outcomes. Now, I guess the point is, it's directly related, right? The more positive the relationship is between teacher and student, the more positive outcomes in the learning of those students. So it's very clear. This is nothing new. This is not rocket science. It's proven research. So this is really the biggest area to work on if you haven't yet developed those really good, respectful relationships with your students. Research is one way of knowing, as I've said just there, but another great way of knowing is the deep human intuition that poets often have and are able to tap into. So another quote which demonstrates this, I love this, it's from Maya Angelou, and it goes like this: I have learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So that's another clue that teaching or long-lasting impact is about relationships. How do you make people feel? So obviously the massive question here is, how does a teacher develop that relationship? How do they earn that right to lead students? How do you make students feel safe, valued, encouraged, and even excited to be in your class? Well, my first tip here is just build rapport. Some people have an absolute natural talent at this. Even if you don't feel that you do, you can learn those skills. So here are some tips on how to build rapport with your students. Firstly, just remember to be yourself. Don't try to pretend to be anybody else. That is harking back to a positional level of authority, assuming you're some fancy person because you have the title of teacher or something like that. And I have seen that happen. It's not useful. You don't need to be anybody else. You can only be yourself. So just relax in that. Yes, you are in a position of authority, so you can comfortably be an authority in a classroom, but you don't need to only have an authoritative figure all the time. So be yourself. The next suggestion is welcome students into your classroom. Obviously at the beginning of a term or a year or semester or whatever you're doing, the first time the class meets, but every day as well. Welcome them genuinely. How do you welcome someone? You look them in the eye and you smile at them. Hello, welcome to class. It can be as simple as that, recognizing that they are there with you in the classroom. Make eye contact with them individually, see them for who they are as unique human beings, and learn their names. That is massive, to learn their names. So you can say, hello, John, welcome to our class today. Some people, again, have better memories than others. So some people find learning names easy. Other people don't. So here is my next lot of suggestions in terms of how do you learn people's names. Before I get into that, though, I do want to make one comment. I know it's a common practice in English classrooms, teaching the English language, when there are students from many different country backgrounds and names may be difficult to pronounce. There is a practice that says, well, let's give them an English name, and they can sort of take this English name and everybody can remember that. It's much easier. I'm not so sure about that. I have done that myself in the past, or students have told me they have an English name and I've used it, but I actually think there's more respect for the teacher to make the effort to learn their real name, even if it's extremely difficult to pronounce, and even if the other students struggle with it. How important is it to create an environment where everybody's valued, including their names, whether or not it's easy for you? So that's my personal opinion, but I am conscious that practice exists. And some students like to have an English name. So, there's pros and cons to it, but my personal take on it is let's just learn the student's real name. So how do you learn names? Well, certainly at the beginning of a term, of a semester, it's a great idea to put name cards on the table, or put name stickers. They could wear name stickers on their shirts or something, or even a seating plan. So you tell everyone, hey, this is where you're going to sit for at least for the first week or something like that, and your plan will tell you what their names are. So you can refer to the little name card or the badge or the seating plan. Every time you look at the student, you could double check what their name is. So that's an easy way to get started. But of course you need to commit it to memory, so that doesn't quite go far enough. One way to do that is to make sure you repeat their name at least 5 times in that first lesson. So every single time you look at someone or address them with a comment, use their name in the sentence. It will help you associate, their face with their name. You could play specific memory games to do with names. Some games could be, for example, where the student comes up with a word to help you remember their name. Maybe the word begins with the same letter. So I might say, for example, hello, my name is Joanna, and I'm wearing a jumper that's special to me, or whatever. So I've used the word jumper with Joanna, whatever it is. Sometimes there's little name games. So great to play those. You could actually create flashcards for yourself. You could take photos of your students if they don't mind, or sometimes obviously schools would have photo registers, so you can get a hold of that, a list of your students and a list of their names, and you could create for yourself some flashcards. This could be physical flashcards where you're printing them out literally and memorizing the face and the name, or it could be digital flashcards. So Quizlet allows you to create flashcards, for example. If you don't know how to use Quizlet, we actually have a course about how to create flashcards and so on at the Language Fuel Academy, so do go ahead and look for that. But there's definitely little things like that to help you remember. You could create competition amongst the students to see who can remember everybody's name, within the first 2 days or something like that. You could make a note about each student, something personal about them. Anytime they tell you something, maybe where they live or what their hobbies are or something like that, to help you remember that each student is a unique individual. So those are the 2 suggestions so far that I've given you in terms of building rapport. The first suggestion being build rapport, which is be yourself, welcome, eye contact and learn names. The next suggestion I have is find ways, these are all the suggestions about building relationships, so find ways to praise students. In other words, to give them some positive encouragement in what they're doing. I'm a massive fan of using positive psychology wherever possible. So rather than always saying, don't do this, don't do that, and having these negative statements around, praise students for what they are doing right. So if you notice, hey, someone's sitting really nicely, paying attention, point it out to them and appreciate it. I think everybody loves to be appreciated. So as much as possible, dole out generous portions of appreciation to your students. We all love to be around people who appreciate us. So that's your role as you're developing relationships with your students, to appreciate them. So constantly be on the lookout for great behavior, great actions, and reward it with acknowledgement. You don't need to give out stickers or erasers or something, although you can. Just words are often enough to encourage great behavior. The next tip I have for you is to assume the best of your students. Even if you are at a place where you have to point out a negative behavior in order to, say that that's not acceptable in the classroom, always assume the best about their intentions, whether or not even if the behavior is not acceptable. So for example, if you notice a student checking their cell phone during class, and if for you that's not acceptable, you could go over to them quietly, say, hey, look, I appreciate you might be checking your timetable or doing something else which is useful. However, in my classroom, we have a rule that we don't check our cell phones during the lesson. So again, you're assuming something positive, even if it's not true and the person genuinely was maybe texting a friend or checking Facebook. By giving them the benefit of the doubt, you are still respecting their choices and you're respecting them as a person. You don't even need to find out whether or not you're right. I wouldn't even ask, hey, are you doing something useful or not? It actually doesn't matter. It's totally irrelevant. You do need to say it's not acceptable. We don't use cell phones in our class during lesson times. However, make a statement that you assume the best of them. Everybody loves being given the chance to be, good in someone's eyes. A couple of more suggestions and then we're done for this week. The next one is respect your students by giving them privacy if there's anything negative you do need to say. So if you do need to point out some negative behaviors and ask them to stop, do that in private. Don't ever embarrass students publicly. If you can avoid it. Sometimes there may be a need for it if there's something urgent that you need to, address, but wherever possible, put negative comments in private and positive comments in public, and that respects their reputation amongst their classmates as well. And like I said earlier, the last thing I'd like to say is just be yourself. Again, talk about yourself. Be a real person in this relationship. Tell some stories. Now, obviously, your level of personal information, how much you would like to disclose, is totally up to you. But don't be a complete stranger. It's nice for them to know. Do you have children? What sort of hobbies you enjoy? Things like that, so that you can be a real person with them. Don't pretend to know anything that you don't genuinely know, but if you don't know something, give a commitment. You know what? I'm going to check this out tonight and I'll let you know tomorrow what I find out. So promise and follow up on those promises, but don't pretend to be something that you're not. And, that's related to being a person of integrity. We all like to be with people who have integrity, people that we can trust. So that ends our first podcast in this little mini series on classroom management. If you are fairly new to teaching and if you're struggling to get student engagement, do take some time to reflect about how you can develop relationships with each of your students, because that is definitely the first step to leadership, having that relationship so that your students will give you the right to lead them. When we come back next week, we will have a look at level 3. And there's a whole bunch of stuff. This is level called production, a whole bunch of stuff in there, a lot of practical advice. I will see you next time. Thank you for listening. Until then, ka kite anō. Thank you for listening to the Language Fuel podcast. You can navigate to the show notes and links via our homepage at www.languagefuel.com. See you next time.